Hi everyone. Have you been having trouble following all the large language model news recently with Claude, Llama 3, OpenAI, and so on, and not sure which large language model to use? Well, I have a friend here, Arjun, who is the CEO of Empirical, who can help to solve this very problem. So without further ado, let me introduce you, Arjun, and let him demonstrate what he can do.
Hey everyone, so excited to be here on your channel, John. And I'll give you a quick summary of what Empirical does, and then jump into a demo. So Empirical is an open source test library which helps LLM developers test and evaluate different LLMs. And we've been sort of building it for the last couple of months, and I'm excited to actually just give you a demo. Nothing better to show the tool visually and give you a feel for what it does. So. Let me just share my screen,
All right, let's go.
and
Let's go.
you should be able to see it now. Can you see it?
Yes, Empirical.
Super. So Empirical's open source, and I'm on our GitHub here. Please do check out Empirical and start the repo. But whatever I'm going to demo is going to be open source, is available on this repo. And so I'll come back to this at the end as well. But let me start off with the core capability of Empirical, which is a playground UI. So just switching tabs here a bit, what you'll see here is a spreadsheet-like playground UI, which is what we've actually built at Empirical. Now let me just walk you through it. I'll zoom it a bit and walk you through it. So on the left here, you will see all the different samples or scenarios that we're actually passing to our LLM, right? And we're passing a string which looks like, hi there, my name is Emily Johnson, and I'm a 20-year-old from California. And we're asking LLMs to actually convert that into a JSON, where the LLM is asked to extract entities like name, age, and location, right? So GPT 3.5 is actually able to do a really good job at extracting that. And unlike playgrounds where you can actually try one input at a time, Empirical actually allows you to try hundreds of inputs, right? Because that is how you get confidence on whether an LLM is working correctly or not. On the right here, I also have responses from the new Llama 3 model, right? The 8 billion parameter model, where Llama 3 is also trying to extract the relevant information on name, age, and location from the message. But you'll see on the top here that it's failing our JSON syntax check,
Well,
right?
it's quite bad, right? It's 0%.
Yeah, it's it tries to sort of yap as they say, and explain itself and sort of surround the JSON with extra information, right? Which makes it tricky to parse if you're actually consuming that JSON on your side. So we're actually demoing a simple entity extraction problem, as you figured out. And this is an interactive playground that Empirical has, so you can actually like make tweaks here. So for instance, if I just hit on the show config button here, I can actually see the prompt that was used and sent to Llama 3, right? So we said, extract the name, age, and location from the message, respond with the JSON object. If an entry is missing, respond with none, right? While we did ask for, respond to the JSON object, perhaps we were not very insistent about it. So I'm just going to make a small change to the prompt here and say, only return the JSON object and nothing else, right? And then we're sending the message, which is actually a placeholder to refer to, the user message here. Now, if I hit the run button, I'll see a new column get added to the same UI. And this is a playground, so it's meant to be interactive and give you a fast feedback loop. And with that change, Llama 3 gives us a 97% on JSON syntax, right? Which is still not good if you compare it to the 100% that we got from GPT 3.5, but it's actually a start, right? And we can scan through these inputs and use the spreadsheet UI that Empirical has to actually give you a sense of, how are you doing on these objective metrics, which is things like JSON syntax, and also actually do some eyeballing to get a sense for subjectively how well is your output, right? Now this UI is something that's obviously built right now for, this entity extraction problem. But let me actually show you how you can use Empirical to build the same UI for your problem statement, right? To do
Actually,
that,
before you move on to that, I've got a quick question.
yeah.
So in this case, how did you evaluate whether the JSON is correct? Because like you can get a list of names and age and so on. Do we have to give the ground truth to you so that you do word for word matching or letter for letter matching? Or is it LM based evaluation? Yeah,
That's
just
a
a
great
bit
question.
more. Yeah.
That's a great question. So we look in this in a bit more detail, but what we're actually doing right now to figure out JSON syntax is that we're just taking the output from the LLM and trying to parse it with a JSON parser, right? And a JSON parser, in Python is simply JSON.loads, right? JSON.loads is not aware of any ground truth, so it does not require any ground truth. It is not aware of the structure of the JSON. It's just, checking whether it's valid JSON or not. That's the limited check that we're doing here. But, for your application, you might actually want to do a stricter check, right? You might want to check for certain types. You might want to check for certain syntax. And I'll show you an example of how we can actually do that with Empirical.
Nice. So we can change the evaluation according to our use case, right? It's not a fixed
That's right.
evaluation. Cool.
That's
cool.
right. That's right. That's right. So, customizing this UI to make it work for your use case is a core need here, right? And that's what I'm going to actually just switch gears and walk you through. So let me actually jump into my editor now. I think you can see VS Code.
Yes, I can.
Now, inside VS Code, I'm going to actually look at the empirical rc.json file, right? Now, every test that you have on empirical is described by this JSON file, right? And so, for your own scenario, you will have a JSON file, which is a declarative configuration that shows the test that you want to do, right? So let's actually go through these bits, the 3 bits that are important here. The first is the runs. And here you'll see that I have a couple of blocks. And these blocks actually have, the OpenAI 3.5 turbo model and, the Llama 3 model on Fireworks, right? These were the same blocks that we were actually seeing on, our UI when we first opened it. And that's because this is what we had configured to actually get that test, right? Now, let me walk through all of this, and then we'll actually make some changes to this one. The second section is the dataset. Now, in the dataset, I've actually just pointed to a Google Sheet, right? And I can open this Google Sheet for you. This is what the Google Sheet looks like, right? So the Google Sheet is actually a way for you to maintain your test cases, right? And we have all of our test cases, which, represent our problem statement, right? Empirical can actually pick whichever format you have here, right? So you can have different column names that are more representative for your use case, so on and so forth. If I go back here, this section, the scorer section, actually describes the evaluation metrics that I have. Now, I just have one metric here, which is, a JSON syntax. Now, let me make another metric, which actually mirrors the problem statement that you just described.
So we can actually check the output fields also, right? To make sure that
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So let's add another scorer. We'll call the scorer JSON contents, right? So we're doing a syntax check on the first one and then doing a contents check on the second one. Here, I'm going to actually use a Python script to describe my scorer, right? And I can actually, with Empirical, I can just point it to a path, which is a path to a file. And I'm going to label this file as, score.py, because that is the file that I already have created here. And I'm just going to open that and walk you through it. So what Empirical is doing is it's saying that I'm going to use this function, this evaluate function, to actually score my output, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to load the output. I'm going to, do a JSON loads on it. So I'm parsing it. And then I'm going to compare the name field from the parsed output against the inputs field, right? So here, if you go back to our spreadsheet, we have the golden truth here. We have the name and we have the age, and we're going to use these and compare the contents of the output against the input. And if it fails, we send score as 0. If it passes, we send score as 1. So this is actually a custom scorer for this application, right? And because this is Python, you can actually change it to your application as well. And so that configures like a new scorer to actually check for the content and validate against golden truth.
Right.
Now, let me make another change.
What if I want to, can you go back to score.py?
Mm-hmm.
So if let's say I want to make like all of them lowercase to compare, I can just do parse.getName.lower, right? Then I can just basically whatever change I want to, if I don't want to make sure that it's always the same casing, just to make sure you can make .lower and it will still work.
Yeah, it'll just work.
Any Python code can run here as long as you put it in the evaluate function.
That's
what
exactly
if
right.
you want to use LLMs to evaluate as well, like to see whether the answer is close to the ground truth with an LLM-based metric?
Yeah, that's a great one, actually. So we have another built-in type for that, and it's called an LLM critic.
Yeah. Can you share more about that? Because I think nowadays people are using LLMs to evaluate ground truth to the generated answer because, sometimes it's not so clear-cut word for word. It might be similar meaning, But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's exactly right.
right.
That's exactly right. So the LLM critic actually uses an LLM under the hood, and all it requires is a criteria. And notice that one more thing that we've really invested in is auto completion like this, right? So there's a bunch of magic under the hood that I can walk you through. But here you can actually describe the criteria that you want to check for, right? So let's say I want to check that the output has a JSON with name, age, and location. Now, this just describes what we want, right? It's a success criteria, and we're sending it to an LLM, and an LLM is actually going to just under the hood compare the criteria with the output and actually give us a response.
Which LM is it? Can you define it?
Yeah, so right now we're actually using GPT-4 Turbo for this.
Oh yeah, use the best
And
model, right? Use
yeah,
the best.
it's pretty good. Although I think for this particular task, we could actually go down to 3.5.
Mm.
And so, we should make this configurable, but for now, we've actually just kept it simple.
Understand. Yeah.
So this is, what the scorers look like. I'm going to remove the LLM critic scorer for now, just because I want the output to be much faster, so that
Yeah,
we have
GPT-4
a
Turbo is fast
faster
forward.
sort of
Understand.
experience. I'm going to actually make some changes to the run section here, right? So notice what we did here. So we went to the prompt for Llama 3, and then we actually made some change, and then it failed in some scenarios, right? And we can obviously take a look at what those scenarios were, but 97% is not good enough for me. So here I'm going to actually use, join your library, which is StrictJSON, and
Nice.
actually try
Yeah.
and run that on Llama 3 so that we can actually get just better JSON output, right? So instead of actually sending the response to a model, I'm going to actually send our query to a Python script again, right? And just as we did with the scorer, I'm going to define the path to the Python script, which is a file that I've written, which is func.py. Now, if I just open func.py, you'll see that it has a couple of functions. The primary function is this execute function.
Okay.
The execute function is actually importing, we're importing StrictJSON on the top here. And, I'm sure your community is well aware, StrictJSON essentially gives you guaranteed JSON outputs. And so I'm loading StrictJSON here, I'm passing a system prompt, I'm passing a user prompt. And here I'm actually defining what is the output format, right? So I'm actually defining things like, I want the age to be a
Integer,
type int,
yeah.
right? And this is really critical because I don't know if anyone caught this, but if you see here, Llama on the third column started just spitting out age and string, right?
Oh,
Here it was actually spitting out age and numbers, right? And again, this could be a foot gun that breaks our integration when we're using Llama for something like entity extraction. So this is really handy, right? I can actually give that type. And then more importantly, and perhaps my favorite feature of StrictJSON is the fact that I can hook up a custom LLM, right? And here I've actually hooked up a custom LLM. So, I'm using the OpenAI library, but I'm using Fireworks under the hood. And Fireworks is an inference provider, which allows me to, use Llama 3 using an API. And it's compatible with the OpenAI spec, so it actually works with the OpenAI library. And so I'm using the chat completions API here, but passing, Llama 3, 8 billion instruct, and, just returning the content, and then letting StrictJSON do the magic to actually just figure out the output here.
nice. By the way,
So
StrictJSON is actually meant to use with various open source LLMs because there's no real hard and fast rule in terms of like you need OpenAI like JSON mode. It actually does the JSON parsing using rule-based approaches. And then like if you put type string type in, it will actually do very deterministic conversions. And if it fails, it will do error feedback loop and so on. So yeah, thanks for promoting StrictJSON as well in this. And
no, for
yeah,
sure.
I hope it works for your use case.
Yeah, we see lots of customers and lots of demand for open source LLMs, right? And that's because they're smaller, they're cheaper, they give you more control, and they're lacking an ecosystem of tooling around them, right? And I think StrictJSON solves a real need there. So let's look at our updated run section again. So we have 3.5 Turbo. Let's keep that for reference, and we have Llama 3 being called via StrictJSON, and we're using a Python script there. We don't need this anymore, so I'm just going to remove this particular line. And so now we have an updated configuration, and this is declarative, which means that Empirical under the hood will figure out what needs to be done to make this configuration happen.
Okay, can we just step through this a little bit? So like the runs, if you put two braces there, does this mean that you are running two different prompts or like two different output generation? Like the first one, you are using a prompt
That's exactly right.
generate, and the second, you're using StrictJSON.
That's
That's
exactly right.
under runs. And dataset is basically that spreadsheet that we've seen just now with the
Yes.
starting text and then the extracted fields as the output.
Yes.
And then for scorers, scorer number one is just JSON.load as the JSON syntax, whether it loads. And scorer number two is to see whether the JSON contents match. So it's a stricter check.
That's exactly right.
So I
That's
expect to
exactly right.
see a total of two different outputs and two different checks on each output. Is that
That's
correct?
exactly right.
All right.
Another mental model that sort of helps me sort of think about this is runs in our world refer to columns,
Okay.
right? And samples or the data set refers to the rows, right? And this grid-like view essentially just gives us like a more visual understanding of the same UI. But yeah, that's exactly what's happening here. So Empirical is open source. If you noticed, I was running this off a localhost endpoint, and that was actually running via this command that I have here on the CLI. I'm just going to kill this command, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use our run command, and run command will actually just read the empirical JSON file, and it'll actually just start generating outputs and scoring them for us.
All right. Maybe we do a quick take here, like where, because if let's say people use this, this is open source, by the way, you can download the GitHub and use. Where should we run this? In which folder or something? Like, do you talk more details about how do we run it? Yep.
That's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up. So let's look at the CLI once, right? This CLI is actually using npx, which is actually the executor for npm, which is the node package manager, right? So the CLI is actually hosted on npm, where you can actually see the CLI on npm. This is where it's downloaded from, and npx automatically downloads it for you when you actually run this command, right? So you don't need to clone the repo. You only need to clone the repo if you want to make some changes to our code base, right?
Okay.
To use the CLI, all you need to do is just run npx, and pass the CLI command.
Nice.
You
It's
can
something
actually
like it's something like a Python package, right? That
yes,
yeah, that you can just run with
it's
the command line.
exactly. And we actually and we should actually change this, make it clearer here. But you can actually just start with an empty directory, and in that empty directory, run the init command.
Nice. So you create for us the directory. Cool, cool.
Exactly. And so the init command will actually just create a simple empirical.rc.json file for you, which can then be edited as per your need.
Nice. Then basically we can just do what we did just now, specify your runs, your data set, your
That's
scorers.
exactly it.
And then in the same folder as your empirical rc.json, you can specify whatever Python files, whatever data sets you need, all in that folder.
That's exactly right. That's
All right,
exactly right. So the
sounds
steps
easy to
that we
use.
did, yeah, the steps that we did were run and UI, but this is the initial setup that we can also have done. We could have done.
Cool. Any
I'll go back to the
to
yeah.
install?
Sorry,
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe
I'll go back to the.
it's a bit more technical, but like, do we need to install like requirements.txt or something to run it, or is all in the package already?
It's all in the package. It's all in the package. I did. I did. Yeah, it's all in the package actually. It is possible for you to actually, pass the Python path if you have certain dependencies that are not available. But I'm already in the virtual environment, which is why I didn't need to pass this.
Cool. I mean, sounds quite easy to use. All right. You can continue demonstrating. Yeah, sorry I
Yeah,
interrupted to find out more about how to use this.
yeah, sure. No worries at all. That's a really important question, actually. So, this is what we did, right? So we did the npx run command, and we can see a quick summary of the scores here in the terminal. So it shows us a tabular view with GPT 3.5 and func.py, which is our funky name for, the StrictJSON example. We got 100% outputs from both of them. And JSON syntax was 100%. So, both of them actually gave us 100% JSON syntax, which is a big win. And that's really because of StrictJSON. JSON contents were slightly lower on this one, right? And all of this wrapped up in 11 seconds. A lot of work that we've done under the hood is to make this experience super fast to run. Because we actually, our core belief is that, this the iteration speed of actually building on top of LLMs needs to be much faster than what it is. And which is why like we had to do the work to, make sure that batching is taken care of, rate limiting is taken care of, all the dirty work of making sure that the API calls are fast is sort of handled under the hood.
You do parallel threading also?
That's right.
Nice, nice. So the async runs and so on. So all this, you don't have to worry if you use this package. It's all
That's
handled.
exactly right. That's exactly right.
Nice. Can I check the
So
GPT 3.5 Turbo is without StrictJSON, right? That you show here. It's just the prompt. And the
it's just the prompt.
func.py is Llama 3 with StrictJSON.
That's right.
Okay, can.
That's exactly right. So, so the run actually just creates it on, the terminal, does everything on the terminal. And the run is also built in a way that you can run it on CI/CD, right? So on GitHub Actions and so. But if I want to actually see what the outputs are here, because I want to do a subjective evaluation and maybe dig into what went wrong here, I can use the UI command.
Nice.
And when I open the UI command, it just opens the browser for me again. Right?
And all this is open source as well, right? So
all of this is open source. Yeah,
nice,
all of
nice.
this is open source. So again, like a couple of columns, GPT 3.5, and I can do show config here, which shows me the prompt that was passed and no additional parameters were passed. Right. So we did not have JSON mode, and 3.5 doesn't even have JSON mode. So, you don't need to worry about that. Func.py, if I show config here, we didn't pass any parameters because we just kept everything simple. We could have, passed certain parameters here and use the parameters to change the behavior of this particular function, but we just kept things simple. And
if I want to put parameters, where should I put it? I don't put in the UI, right? I should put in some file, right? The parameters.
you can put it in the UI as well. But here, you'll actually see that I can just specify parameters here.
And the parameters are in JSON, right? So like whatever key
Yes.
value you put inside this parameters.
That's exactly right. So let's say I want to write a parameter saying LLM should be, Llama in Llama 3 a billion instruct, right? And what I can do here is instead of doing, let's say, LLM equals LLM, I can do something like, parameters dot get LLM and maybe pass a default value.
They need to put because this LM is a function, so probably
yeah.
the parameters will be in the above LM defined
Yes.
definition.
Yeah, so we'll have to maybe
So we
do
need to rejig the prompt a bit. Yeah.
yeah, we'll need to maybe like pass parameters here or pass like a model name here or something like that, right?
Okay.
But that's the kind of change that you can make with parameters. Now, right off the bat, JSON syntax 100% on both sides, so that's awesome, right? And JSON contents is 97% here. And here we're actually like we can scan through and see what went wrong, right? So one of the things that I actually noticed was a lot of the examples that I have here are actually in different languages, right? So you'll actually see examples that don't run on the Roman script, right? And some of the cases where JSON contents is failing is because things like name does not match because we are unable to actually handle the non Roman script here, right? And that's I think an easy change for us to make inside StrictJSON to actually make that better. But right off the bat, if you don't have an example that uses non-Roman examples, which is a large variety of examples, StrictJSON will actually just work out of the box, right?
Nice. I'm actually quite
So
impressed with Llama 3. Like I thought Llama 3 would only work well for English. It turns out that they can extract other languages as well.
yeah, it does. And
Really surprising for me.
yeah, personally, I've actually been very impressed with Llama 3. I feel like obviously the prompt formatting or the instruction following is not as good as something like 3.5. But it turns out to be much faster. It's smaller, and it's actually pretty capable once you get around to some of those prompting limitations. And I think things like StrictJSON actually make that a lot easier. But personally, I think Llama 3 is an amazing model. But that actually wraps up the demo here. So just a quick recap, right? Everything's open source. I'm not sort of hiding anything. What you get when you're using Empirical is you get this UI, and this UI is our take on a playground for developers, which is an n cross n playground, right? N samples, n models, or n rows. and you can actually make changes here like we did with, the prompt iteration that we did for Llama 3. And this playground is customizable through this particular JSON file, which is, declarative syntax to actually where you can define your runs, you can define your data set, you can define scorers. And we've made it customizable such that, if you don't want to use an inbuilt scorer like this one, you can just write your own in Python, right? And you can use the CLI to actually run things in the terminal, use the run command to run things, use the UI command to actually spin up the UI again. That sort of combines, subjective evaluation that you're doing, as you go through it row by row, or objective evaluation through the scorers that you have here on top. Yeah, that wraps up everything that we have on Empirical right now. I'd love to maybe give you a glimpse of what we're doing, on top of this. Do check out Empirical. And
maybe as a concluding statement for this demo, not for this video, but I'm just thinking that how I would personally use Empirical is like this. Right now, a lot of LLM flows are in some pipeline where you do like use LLM for this part, then maybe use some deterministic way for another part and the LLM for another part as well. So
yeah.
whatever parts you use at LLM form, you can take the input output of the LLM part and put it in Empirical as a data set. And
Yes.
the process of what the LLM does would be what you put in your runs. Like you can put a Python script describing how you prompt the LLM, or if you're using StrictJSON, you can call StrictJSON with whatever Python code you use.
Yeah.
And then what this does is that when your data set is increased, you can see whether or not the earlier parts still work when you try to integrate more and more use cases. Or if OpenAI releases a new model, you can see whether your old data set with the input and output, whether it still works with the new model or with a new prompt in StrictJSON and so on. So I think this is a very cool way to make sure that your production line is still robust, and you can do this all with Empirical. So I quite like this. In fact, the main reason why I like Empirical so much is that it's all open source. I mean, this is really, really rare for a company. And later on, I'll ask you some questions on that. But before that, any other things you'd like to say about the demo before we wrap it up?
You described it really well. And I'm just going to give you one tiny thing to add to that. So, in the func.py, I could even do something like this. I could do from my app, import, economist agent.
Oh, what's
right?
that?
So let's say I have a hypothetical application where I'm using, a bunch of libraries under the hood, and I've created something called an economist agent, right? And the economist agent is actually exported from my Python file, right? So let's say I have a Python application here. I can then actually just use economist agent here inside execute and test this particular agent, right? So the point being, because this is Python, you can actually import your application directly. You don't need to rewrite the application inside Empirical, right?
Nice.
Which gives you like Empirical becomes a thinner layer, right? Because you don't want to repeat yourself and have the risk of your application sort of drifting away from your test code.
Basically, you can import your whole application inside the Empirical. Basically, any Python function you can just put inside the same folder as your empirical rc.json, and it will work.
That's exactly right, John.
Nice, nice. I mean, this is really cool. Like the way you can use the UI to scroll through, see what works, what doesn't work, really helps to make the process of evaluation much more fun. Like rather than just seeing some numbers, you actually have some green and red boxes, which
That's
helps a
exactly right.
lot with visualization. I really like it. So now actually I would like to ask some questions about Empirical, and also like what you are going to do. But first, the key question is why open source all this? Because like this sounds really good. I mean, you could potentially put this as a product with a paid product. Like, what was the key motivation behind open sourcing this?
Yeah, so our first iteration was not open source. When we were building this in January and February, we actually were focusing on a UI, which you could customize through the UI. But we actually found that that was not enough for customization, right? Because just as what I did right now, I need to be able to reference part of my application. And to be able to do that, Empirical had to be a library, right? So just being a UI was not enough. We had to have a library. We had to have a CLI. And you needed to have those things so that you could customize Empirical for your use case, right? And In 2024, you can't ship a CLI or a library that's not open source, right? Just no one would take it, right? Both me and my co-founder, we are motivated by seeing customers adopt our product, by users adopting our product, and we didn't want anything to come in the way of that, right? Which is why open source was a very natural choice. The question really was, will this be, something that we regret down the line because we're not able to monetize it? We have certain theses on how we will monetize it, and obviously, the open source will continue to be open source. We think that the amount of value that we're providing and the way it sort of intersects with the developer's workflow, open source is the right way to do it. And it's on us to sort of figure out how to build a business on top, right? And that's work we'll have to do over the next, year or so.
I really like this idea because actually all of my main projects are also open source as well. Like the StrictJSON you used just now is the work of 2 years of my efforts of from engineering and also like doing some rule-based structure on it. And
Yeah.
I also have an agentic framework called TaskGen building on StrictJSON that does agentic workflows using StrictJSON as intermediate outputs. So all these are open source. And I think the main reason why I like open source so much is that it helps to build a community and it helps the ideas gets used, gets developed. Because when people use, they give ideas, give suggestions. Like when you use it, you found out the Unicode issue. So no worries, we will solve it. So because when I tested on StrictJSON, I only tested on English. So this is a good thing, a good test to see whether it works on other languages as well. So you see, open source helps to build this kind of collaboration community, and I like it a lot. The only issue is if you need to monetize something to survive, you have to think of other ways. So that's actually leads to the next question. Like, how can we help Empirical? Like, this is a great product. Like, how exactly are you intending to monetize yourself? Because as a
Yeah.
company, you still need to survive.
Yeah, for sure. So, the way we sort of look at this is, empirical today is a way for you to experiment and measure how certain parts of your application are performed, right? Every application out there that is using an LLM is concerned about three metrics, right? You're concerned about quality or accuracy, then you're concerned about latency, and then you're concerned about cost, right? And empirical today with the UI and those numbers gives you a sense of how you're performing with those numbers, right? Now, measuring itself is, a small part of the puzzle, right? The next step is actually optimizing these numbers, right? So
Mm.
for example, what we did with, StrictJSON is that we took the measurement and then we applied some work and then we optimized that measurement to go from 97% on the JSON syntax to 100% and like a similar bump on JSON contents, right? So the value in this equation, right? The value that I drive as a user is the optimization bit and not the measurement piece, right? The measurement is just a way for me to like get started. So if you think about it, the open source story for Empirical is actually the measurement piece. And what we're actually experimenting with is we're actually optimizing these numbers for certain use cases with fine-tuned models. So a base model might work out of the box and give you great accuracy. So for example, if you're using GPT-4, you get great accuracy out of the box, but maybe the cost and latency is too high, which means
Mm.
that you need to use a smaller open source model, which is fine-tuned and fine-tuned in a way that it gives you as accurate results as GPT-4 without the cost and the latency of GPT-4, right? And so what we're
Maybe a
doing
Llama
is,
3 would do that job. Llama 3 is quite fast. Yeah, and it's
yeah,
quite
for sure. Yeah. And so, what we're actually thinking in terms of, and I'm, sort of, this is early. So I'd love to welcome feedback from the group here as well. But our sense about this is, monetization can only happen when we give a lot of value to our users, and
mm.
that value will come from optimization. And one way to optimize is use things like StrictJSON. Another way to optimize is to use other prompt techniques or fine tune models. And so we're actually finding the right use cases for us to focus on where we can actually give optimizations out of the box, right? And those optimizations will then create an opportunity for us to monetize. I strongly believe that you can't monetize before you provide value, right? The question is you provide value and then you sort of, find a way to monetize it. And, we think that the value will come from optimization. So that's what we're, building towards.
So basically, you perform a role more akin to like a consultant, help the company optimize the workflow, integrate LLMs into workflow using the knowledge that you have about LLMs to help them to optimize their workflow processes better from that
Yeah,
angle.
that's exactly what we're doing right now. We are actually doing consultative work with a set of customers to actually help them optimize. And we think there are product ideas there as well, right? Which will allow us to scale this, to a larger set of people. And, and that's really what we're, working towards. And that will essentially give us a way to monetize, by sort of packaging some of the consulting work that we're doing into a product, but maybe not do it for all use cases, maybe do it for a smaller set of use cases.
Nice. Who are your target customers?
We focus on customers that have application engineers or product engineers or application developers building on top of LLMs. We're very excited by sort of seeing how, off-the-shelf LLMs have been used by, developers who don't have ML experience to actually build,
Yeah.
AI features. And those users are everywhere, right? Like we're seeing applications in healthcare, we're seeing applications in consumer apps, we're seeing applications in enterprise apps. So we don't have a cut that sort of segments on the basis of industry, right? We do have a slight preference for smaller companies because they tend to be agile and move faster. But the key sort of parameter is, are they building on an off-the-shelf LLM, right? And that's really the way we sort of prioritize our customer segmentation.
Actually, even if it's not off the shelf, like fine-tune LLMs, the approach you have for empirical also would work because you can just call your own. So even for the workflow, you also can have fine-tuned LLMs, not necessarily just off the shelf, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. The interesting pieces, and again, this is something that I love to get your feedback as well. We've seen ML engineers have evaluation toolkits,
Mm.
right? You've spent so much time playing with data, in a Jupyter notebook or, some other place that you're very comfortable with those aspects, right? An application developer is very new to all of this, right? Because they're doing data-driven testing for the first time, right? And therefore, while you're right, you're absolutely right that a fine-tuning model can also be used. We've generally seen that if a company is fine-tuning, they probably have ML expertise, and therefore they also have their way of evaluation.
I see. So,
And
so the value you bring is not as much as compared to off-the-shelf models.
that's exactly
I mean,
right.
people
And
who use off-the-shelf.
that's exactly right. And we're a small company, so always good to sort of keep the focus on a smaller segment. And as things grow, maybe we can expand that. But that's how I think about it. And maybe this is the wrong way of thinking. So curious to
No, I
hear
think
what
it's
you
fine.
and the
Yeah.
group think.
So even for like my company also, I've also been trying to avoid fine tuning. The main reason is because yes, you can fine tune on your data set, you can host your own model, but the thing is the pace of LM is the breakthroughs are happening so fast. By the time you
Yep.
fine tune on an old model, maybe a latest model will already beat your fine tune stuff,
Yep.
and then you need to refine tune on the new one. So to me, if we could imbue things, so this is a bit more of like what I'm trying to do, can imbue some form of memory where you can learn from past experience, consolidate in some appropriate form, and then you imbue this knowledge into the prompt, that
Yep.
may actually be much better than fine-tuning because you can plug and play your LMs.
Yeah,
Like the
for sure.
data, you can just plug and play in this whole like agentic or memory-based workflow. And empirical could be used to test this also, like to see whether it works with the new LMs and so on. So I'm very excited to use it actually. Yeah. So more of your own personal motivations. Like, so for me, I can share with you like what I like to do. Like my aim is to create fast and adaptable agents that can like learn independently, improve by itself, and do arbitrary tasks. That's why I did all this task gen and so on. I'm very motivated to create the system. What's your motivation? What do you hope to do with your life? Yeah, it's a big
You
question.
know, Yeah, no, that's a great question, and thanks for asking that. Um, I've built products for developers, all my professional life, and the reason why I've actually enjoyed doing that is because developers in the last couple of decades have been able to sort of use software to change so many lives out there, right? And I'm really motivated to actually see that change that's happened. And we've seen the developer base really grow from sub a couple of million to 30 million over the last 20 years, right? We've seen developers grow, and we've seen our lives get transformed with the technology that's actually built by those developers, right? Um, we've seen that ML engineering has made a big difference in companies or products that were able to hire great ML engineering talent, right? But if you look at the macro scale of things, right? there are 30 million developers, 30 million application developers, but only 300,000 ML engineers, right? And so a lot of the technology that machine learning has been able to bring about has been limited to a smaller set of companies than the broad range of developers that have been able to transform markets. And
Mhm.
what really happened last year, right? Like when we started playing with LLMs, and I'm sure you've been playing with LLMs for much longer than many of us have, right? But we saw that this was a zero shot ML model that anyone could build on top of,
Yeah,
right?
it
And
really revolutionized the whole field because a lot of people can now have access to cutting edge technology. Like it's really
that
revolutionary. Yeah, I feel like you can
that
do so much with this kind of systems. Yeah, please
that's
continue.
exactly right. That's exactly right. And so much of our lives, we've been trying to adapt to the technology that's built for us, right? Like when I'm, let's say, buying something on Amazon, my mind knows how to search Amazon, right?
Mm,
But that's because Amazon does not know how to understand my language, right? Or a search box on the internet, has sort of limitations in understanding my language, right? And what I'm excited by is if the capabilities that we've now been able to, come up with, if that can be democratized to 30 million developers, that means those 30 million developers can actually make it possible for, billions of people to actually use those technologies, right? And add value. And and that's the journey that we ourselves see enabling in a small way, right, where we're actually just making those 30 million developers more productive with using off-the-shelf LLMs that can actually be used to empower themselves and therefore add value to their end users' lives. And that story really motivates me to build a better.
nice. Actually, I can see a trend in also your past startups, like in your 100 ms, you did the video models to help people do video conferences better during COVID. Like it's also from the angle of helping people, right, live better lives, like giving
Yeah,
them the tools.
for sure. I mean, just at a very high level, like I think technology is a big enabler, and I'm a very sort of optimist when it comes to that. Like I know there are lots of sort of potential pitfalls as well, right from sort of increasing screen time or all sorts of downsides as well. But on the whole, net, I kind of feel like technology is a big enabler and a huge force, and we should continue to sort of enable more of that. And developers, in my opinion, are the best sort of best set of people to actually make that happen.
Yeah, I really like it. I mean, your vision and mine are very similar because I also created this YouTube channel to educate people on like latest trends, make research papers more accessible. And I think the main aim is that, you know, we are progressing so fast. It's just a waste if like only a few people know how to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
fully
So
agree with you.
I really, really enjoy the product you're creating. And actually, I look forward to, more open source from your side or more ideas. I mean, it may not be open source, but, if you share some blog posts and so on, like what other companies are doing, I think that's also good because it helps people know how to build and use LMs to do their workflow and make things like you don't have to repeat the same mistakes that, like, if you can give best practices, all this, it also helps a lot. So I think we are definitely going to stick with LMs. The key question in the future is how much of the LM will be part of the system. LMs will be in the system, but because it's not good for certain stuff like rule following right now, you might need to do a hybrid and so on. So to me, LMs will stay. It's just a matter of how you use it, and using empirical or some eval test set would be very useful to make sure that it's working for your whole product. Yeah, so I really enjoy the conversation with you. Like I really wish all the best for you, like to lead Empirical to really do great things, and hopefully you have some revenue soon or already having revenue. And I can invite you back again for another sharing session next time when you all build something else.
Super. Thanks so much, John, and thanks for the kind words. And yeah, this was great. I really enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, do
So
help to start their GitHub, by the way. So it's can you give the link now?
yeah, for sure.
So if you
Uh,
like what you see today, do give it a try. Maybe you show the GitHub again. So also remember to help them to like their GitHub because it helps to raise awareness. So this is the link here, github
yeah,
dot.
so it's empirical hyphen run slash empirical. And that's and I'm sure we'll be able to sort of add the link on the show notes as well,
Link
right?
will be on the video as well. All right,
Super.
cool. Nice to have you around, Arjun, and I'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.